Chapter 1.
Coming back to the haunting place. A plane lands on the runway at Charlotte Airport. Among the passengers is Cedar Jones, a retired CIA contract assassin. He wears a top-of-the-line suit and carries an expensive briefcase. Cedar looks out the window, taking in the view. The sun is shining brightly, casting long shadows along the tarmac as they taxi down the strip to the parking lot. He takes off his glasses and slips them into his jacket pocket before he exits the aircraft and heads for the terminal. He looks around, taking in the sights and sounds of the bustling airport as he waits for his luggage. He glances at his phone. When he reaches the front of the line, he scans his ID card over the scanner and pushes through the doors into the main terminal area. His footsteps are loud in the quiet, echoing space of the arrivals hall. A few people turn to look at him. The security guards give him wary, hostile stares as he passes. He smiles politely but makes no move to interact with anyone else. His phone immediately buzzed as if the caller had been waiting for him to round up his airport business. He pressed his phone to his ear, looking forward. "Yeah?" He spoke first. "Cedar, it's Jeffrey." The caller on the other end sounded too enthusiastic for his liking, but that was Jeffrey. His mood was often like Charlotte's weather, inconsistent, or in other words, consistent with the situation going on around him.
"Jeffrey, how are you?"
Good. I still don't believe you chose to go back to Charlotte."
Cedar's jaw clenched and unclenched. The reason why he came back to Charlotte was playing at the back of his head, reminding him of his acute concerns. "I had to, no choice for me. I know, call me back on a secure line when you get to the resident." Jeffrey responded. "Will do, but I won't change my mind." Cedar responded, firmly driving home his point. He was a man of his words, like he was of his actions, and it was only going to take divine providence and some miracle to make him change his mind, and even in his world, that miracle did not exist. "We know," the enthusiasm in Jeffrey's voice died, "but you're going to have to explain to yourself, especially to me." Cedar could feel the underlying tension laced with severity as he listened to Jeffrey laying out the details. Cedar's expression remained stoic as he listened. It isn't anger though, more resignation, yet Cedar can sense his reluctance mirrored by Jeffrey. He knew exactly what Cedar's decision entailed. It would mean having to rehash things from their last conversation. The only difference is that this time Cedar would be on the receiving end of whatever decision that is made. He has expected this reaction since his decision. After the conversation is over, Cedar pockets his phone. He checks his watch and then makes his way toward baggage claim. His bags arrive moments later, loaded onto a trolley. He pulls the cart out of the conveyor belt and follows the attendant out the door. Once outside, the cold air hits Cedar in full force. The wind bites his face as he starts to jog along the sidewalk and down the street to where he has parked the black SUV. Once there, he opens the door and gets inside, locking the doors behind him. The car roars to life and starts moving. He sets the cruise control to low and relaxes against the leather seat. As he drives away from the airport, his gaze turns briefly toward the rearview mirror, a habit he developed over time, to constantly check his surroundings and observe anything unusual. As always, he spots nothing suspicious. Nothing is out of place, nothing seems to be out of order, and everything is as normal as it could be, everything but himself, which continues to remind Cedar what a mess he was, constantly checking as if a target is placed on his back. Then he turns to stare out the windshield at the passing cars. The ride feels very long. He watches idly as people weave in and out of traffic. Some seem to pay no attention to the signs. Some appear slightly too occupied to be on the main road. It was just the normal hustling and bustling city life, and as he drove along, his mind strayed far into thoughts. Was it a good idea to come back to Charlotte after everything? He didn't have a choice, so he might as well embrace the change that it brought him instead of hiding. Despite his reservations, he wouldn't deny that he missed Charlotte. He missed the hustle, the rush, and the people who lived and breathed here. Even if those lives were sometimes short or brutal, they were real, they were his family, and despite their flaws, they all loved each other. For a while there, Cedar could pretend, for a moment, that everything was alright and that he belonged somewhere. There was a certain ease to living like that, and it was worth every sacrifice he made to get to where he is now. But as he grew older, reality began to catch up with him. He couldn't escape it any longer. For years he tried to ignore his memories and buried them deep within his psyche. Eventually, he managed to block them out of his conscious mind, But it wasn't easy. And when he thought he was ready to start making a fresh start in Charlotte, he was faced with the harsh reality. He couldn't bring himself to let the pain he went through all those years ago go, but what could he do? Now, finally, here they were resurfacing. He was afraid that if he tried to push them aside again, the memories would find him. That was the last thing Cedar wanted to happen. He needed these memories to stay where they belong, buried in the dark corners of his mind and forgotten by time. The sun peeks over the city skyline as Cedar drives past the district that is located north of the airport, in one of the most popular residential areas of Charlotte. It gives the city a much different feel than he used to remember, the houses looking like they are carved from marble, reflecting the bright sunlight perfectly. The peaking sun glimmers over the buildings and Cedar sighs and leans back in the seat, watching it light up as the sun begins descending beneath the skyline. As it disappears behind the buildings, orange and red glow lights begin flashing and neon billboards flash across the horizon, providing the backdrop for the city. Cedar finds himself mesmerized, watching the beautiful display. The drive down the familiar street takes about 20 minutes. The street was empty except for the occasional car or pedestrian. As Cedar approaches his destination, the scenery changes. The street is crowded with stores and restaurants. He slows down and passes the first store. The windows and doors are decorated with the local cuisine, food from the country, and the latest fashion, both in color and style. He changes into another lane and the neighborhood is filled with tall buildings, trees, and shrubbery that have been carefully trimmed and maintained over the years. Cedar knows the area like the back of his hand. He's driven the streets dozens of times, yet never fails to admire the beauty and tranquility of the area. It reminds him that it's somewhere he'd once called home. As Cedar drives deeper into the neighborhood, he notices people coming from the nearby park, all heading toward the main roads. They were all strangers, but for a fleeting reason, they all looked familiar. Perhaps it was just something about the people of Charlotte. Some stop and talk amongst themselves, others nod to their neighbors in passing. Cedar passes, his eyes fixed ahead, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. Cedar arrives at his high-rise apartment building and enters the lobby. He greets the two young bellhops, Bellhop Jim and Bellhop James. Jim was a tall, muscular guy with blonde hair that looked like it could rival Cedar's, and brown eyes. Bellhop James, however, was a bit shorter, with darker skin, brown eyes, and black hair. He smiled at Cedar warmly as he stepped forward. Both men gave him an awkward handshake in greeting. "Gentlemen," Cedar said firmly, taking each handshake in his hands as firmly as his words. "Mr. Jones, welcome back to the resident. Good to see you. How was your trip?" Jim asked with no curiosity written on his face. It is just more out of courtesy than any form of morality. "It was fine. Listen, I need to use the secure phone line." Cedar got straight to the point. Jeffrey had told him that he needed to call him. Bellhop James nodded, leading Cedar. "Right this way, sir." The bellhops lead Cedar to a secure room in the basement of the building. The room is a dimly lit room, with a glass wall with a closed metal door, showing off a large white monitor. It has two chairs facing each other on either side, with a glass table between them. The room contains nothing else other than a phone mounted on the wall. Cedar picked up the phone, his heart thrummed quietly as he thought for a second what the awaited news was going to be about. Jeffrey wasn't a man to cut through corners. He knew the best way to relay the message was the straightforward way, but he needed to drive home his point as well. He dialed the emergency dial. The phone was picked up on the first ring. "This is Cedar." He spoke first. His voice was cool, calm, and collected, masking his immense curiosity. "Is everyone on the line?" "Everyone is here," responded Jeffrey. His voice was as grim as the mood. 5. Cedar braces himself for what's about to come and Jeffrey's voice comes again, this time more intense than the last. "Here's the situation." The main city bustled with a slow movement of cars. The traffic steamed the air in its monotonous glory, and the people were sluggish, flowing along like the river which it is. There were no stops, as though they had been sent on a mission to get somewhere without delay, and no destinations either for those not bound for it or those being taken there by their own will. It was a pleasant way to live, yet too mundane. The sun was beaming overhead as if it was frowning down on the people of Charlotte, and there was a faint scent of dampness in the air that did nothing to detract from the warmth of the day. Even so, the crowd still swirled around each other in an effortless motion, pushing this way and that. They seemed oblivious to everything outside themselves, and the people who walked around them in a state of near bliss. Strong breeze that rustled through their hair. But they did not seem disturbed by this. They moved on from the road toward their destination as the traffic came to a halt at them. The light turned green and then stopped again. The pedestrians looked up at it for a moment before continuing forward. It didn't matter what direction they went. In the midst of it all, Jewel walks in from her terrace. Her perfect curls cascaded down her shoulders like a waterfall. She wore black trousers and a long-sleeved shirt, and her high-heeled boots matched perfectly with the look. A pair of shades sat neatly placed in her left hand, and a cigar sat precariously in her right. She calls her cell phone only to hear a buzzing signal. She slams the phone into her couch and takes a long swig of her lit blunt. She walks back over to the couch, picks up her phone from the expensive couch cushion and dials a number, but the phone goes dead after the tone, and she is left to wonder if she was letting her frustration get to her or if she just needed a calming bath to ease the feeling, whatever it was plowing through her mind. Either way, she decided not to bother calling anyone for the rest of the afternoon and simply walked back out onto her balcony, where she was greeted by a clear sky with a bright 6. Sun shining down. A gentle wind blew her bangs gently against her cheek, and she breathed deeply, appreciating the fresh air. Jewel looks at her cell phone, takes a swig of her blunt, and looks back at her cell phone while exhaling a ring of smoke. Cedar enters his luxurious apartment. The walls are covered with a beautiful black velvet wallpaper, the floors are polished wood with thick rugs and plush chairs. Something about the ambience was calming, yet he still felt uneasy. As Cedar stepped into his apartment, the lights flicked on automatically with a pleasant hum of electrical power. The air conditioning system whirred to life with an almost audible whine. As he entered the living room, he noted how the furniture was arranged in an almost elegant fashion, and Cedar was glad for it, because he felt like the tension that's been building up inside of him had finally released. The apartment is decorated with dark wooden furniture. A simple black couch facing the TV stands in front of a huge screen, where silent motion pictures begin to play. He takes off his jacket, puts several bags down, and heads to the kitchen to prepare a meal. He carefully takes an apple from the refrigerator and inspects the apple, a bowl from the cabinet, and a knife out of the kitchen counter. He places weapons and arranges them on the table. As he prepares his bowl of cereal and fruit, his phone starts to ring. However, he ignores the phone ringing. It doesn't seem important anyway, but as a precautionary measure, he checks his caller ID and sees who it is. Not only doesn't he care about what happens, but he also doesn't even have any interest in hearing about whatever could be the cause of this annoying interruption, because his mind has already been filled by something more important than anything else in this world, which is why he hasn't bothered picking up, at least not since he received the call from Jeffrey earlier this morning when he just landed in Charlotte. So, he lets the phone ring on. After placing the bowl on the counter, Cedar arranges his weapons on the counter as well before he decides he needs to wash the sweat away from his soul. Stepping under the faucet felt 7. Relieving to his soul. He closes his eyes and allows the water to gently massage his temples, which were throbbing violently. After several minutes under the stream, Cedar steps out and opens one eye. He looks at himself in the mirror and is surprised at how tired he looks. However, his face didn't show a hint of fatigue or irritation. Instead, he was just calm. He seemed so calm that a part of him wished his phone would stop ringing so soon, to give him the chance to catch a breath. But that was the reason he was here, after all, wasn't it? To take a break, relax, and maybe even take a shower. Just relax for a second, and then everything will return to normal. Maybe. It sure doesn't feel that way at the moment. Cedar tries to put his hand on the sink and the pressure causes him to wince, which makes Cedar wonder if he isn't doing things right. That thought brings another pang of pain and frustration to his chest. With a sigh, Cedar grabs a towel from behind him. On the rack, a lazy gun lay on a towel, making Cedar feel he was maybe pushing himself too far. As an assassin, he couldn't be too lax. His world was spinning in a circle and walked toward the bedroom. Cedar can't help but let his shoulders slump and head hang down a little as he enters the spacious bedroom, dressed in clean clothes, and walks back to the kitchen to have his meal while he cleans his weapon meticulously. The clinking of his spoon against the ceramic bowl told him of how large his apartment was, yet he was the only one in it, surrounded by his unpacked suitcase and gears. The apartment used to have more life before, but times have changed and everything reminded him that he was by himself. The quietness of his home reminded him of how much time he spent there, alone, with no one to talk to or even listen to. Cedar knows better than to believe that loneliness is nothing to fear, but it always feels like a burden that is constantly weighing down on him. It was something that happened to everyone eventually, and the quietness of his home had never really suited him, but he had grown accustomed to it over time until it became a habit he started to develop. It's a routine that he had fallen into, and sometimes he wonders if he should stop it, but people like him couldn't just stop the life they have just because of some gumption or some unsettling feeling they have. His life as an assassin wasn't something he could just modify just because he had a feeling, a short fleeting feeling that would vanish as soon as it came. 8. His eyes strayed to an old photo that sat on his kitchen counter. It had always been there. It was a happy picture of what used to be a life he once adored. It was a picture of the love of his life, Jewel. In the picture, the both of them were wrapped around one another in a beautiful embrace. She had dyed her hair red back then. Whatever color she wore suited her. Her smile splayed perfectly over her face like a flower petal spread across the sky, and her eyes twinkled like a starry night, and her skin was fair and smooth and free of any imperfections. Her bright smile reminded Cedar to have fun. She would always make him laugh, and he wouldn't forget those smiles ever again. She wasn't beautiful in the traditional sense of beauty, but there was something so pure about her beauty that made it special. Her eyes were warm and welcoming, and her smile reached her whole being. She made Cedar weak in the knees when he first saw her. It was a good memory, but as Cedar stared at the photo, the reality of things dawned on him. Like him, Jewel was also an assassin who worked for the Secret Service. She was tough as much as she was delicate. There were two sides to her, one which he adored and the other which he respected. She could also be a nutcase sometimes. The thought brought a stray smile to the corner of his cheeks. His phone buzzes again. Cedar took a deep breath as his smile faded, and he answered it, speaking first. "Jewel, it's me. I'm back in town," he fessed up before she heard it from somewhere else. Her voice was almost stoic, as if she took a minute to take in the information before she responded. It could also be that she was trying to keep her emotions in check because she was probably high as hell. "Cedar, where are you? I'm at home. Can you come over?" He closed his eyes to the sound of her voice. He missed hearing it, like he hadn't heard it in a long time. Her gentle voice could be fierce depending on her emotion. Her voice reached him back, but he didn't expect her to accept as quickly. "Of course. I'll be there soon. Not this moment." He stopped her. There were things he needed to do before he saw